Welcome back to Homerik. On today's episode, we are going to continue our discussion with David Millgate and talk a little bit more about some of the upcoming works on Homerik and how David is approaching that. Thank you for joining us on our first interview with David Millgate. You can find David Millgate on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at David Millgate. I'll put his handle and links in the description below. You can also find David's book, Jackboot and Iron Heel. This is his graphic novel. I encourage you to take a look and read it. He's been on Comic-Con and he's gone to many conventions and presented his work over at those festivals, and you can find him there if you're in the UK. So, without further ado, David, welcome back. It's good to see you here.
Hello, Ken. Nice to be back. Thank you. Yeah.
So last time we were talking about your artistic sort of process with Homerik and how you sort of were interpreting the text, right? And now as we are sort of moving forward in the Homerik universe, I want to sort of elaborate a little bit more on that process. And then talk a little bit about how you're going about making, for example, the album cover. We've sort of recently discussed that, and that is going to be your latest addition to this collection of paintings, which, by the way, is a total of now it's nine pieces, right? We've done every single level of the Inferno. And I want to, kind of dive into a little bit more as to why we decided to create 9 paintings, and also what's happening in between them as far as chapters go, because there's many more chapters than there are paintings. And one of the things that I thought was very important was to have a sort of visual sort of reference as you went through the story. It helps to bring that cinematic feel to life. And so let's start with what was the reason for doing only 9 sort of collage-like paintings? I remember I asked this question when we first started, and you came up with the idea of doing these big epic paintings. And I wanted to know why was that when you initially started?
I think the first conversations we had, I think we talked about the possibility of doing a graphic novel of the entire story, which would have been much more keeping to the text, panel by panel. I mean, you could probably have filled 9 volumes if you'd approached it that way, quite easily, because there's so much source material here. And that could have been one way of doing it. But obviously, I just actually finished my graphic novel, Jackboot and Iron Heel, not too much time before that conversation. And that took me 7 years. Mm-hmm. And it was a labour of love, but it was tough at times. Just the sheer volume of work, obviously, because I was illustrating the whole thing. I was the penciler, the inker, the colourist, the letterer, the editor, and I wrote it. So I was wearing many hats on that, which I'd never done before and was very interesting, but I wasn't sure I wanted to jump back into another 7 years doing another one. That's part of the reason, but also I did have the idea, and we talked about this as well as an option, which is what we went for in the end, that maybe another way of approaching it that you maybe hadn't thought about as an option yourself would be to incorporate more than one chapter into one of the paintings. So maybe 2 or 3 chapters would be encompassed in one image, and that's why they kind of took on this montage feel and kind of composition style, because I could literally cherry pick the most exciting and dramatic moments and characters that would make for one really pow kind of image, And that's what we both agreed would be a good way to go. Obviously, there's the 9 levels of hell, which he's talked about a lot. So it made sense to do 9 paintings, so that they'd all be represented by one image. Obviously, in doing that, I had to leave out quite a lot of material as well. But we've already decided on a way that we can maybe fill in some of those gaps with other illustrations, maybe not ginormous paintings again, but maybe some black and white line art, which would be filling in and touching on some of those points that maybe we didn't manage to get into the pictures. So we'll work on that, I guess, next year once I've done the album cover, which I'm currently thinking about.
Right.
And we've discussed that enough. And that's an exciting. I'm dying to get onto doing the album cover because it's obviously a really important image.
Yeah.
And it's one that deserves to take a little bit of time on. And we've done that. We talked about it, discussed it, and I think by the time we get through Christmas and the New Year, I'll be just dying to get on with those drawings and designs for that image. So that's going to be another great one to do for me.
It's kind of hilarious because we sort of, that's, by the way, amazing. I did not know it took you 7 years to create your graphic novel, but it certainly explains why, graphic novels take so long in the first place. I mean, you have to draw every single scene and every single page and all the text, and you have to map out how it looks and the composition and all that stuff. So, yeah, it's a daunting task. Absolutely, and I totally understand. And in a sense, it's kind of hilarious because we're taking we sort of avoided that route and we created these paintings, and now we're slowly kind of doing a little bit of that again, and going into but instead we're doing illustrations for each chapter, and you have these wonderful monstrous paintings that are, how big are they at this point? How big are each of these pieces of paper or these canvases?
They're A1 size, which is, they're sort of, well, it's a little bit hard to to get here on Skype, but they're huge. They're actually, the paintings end up bigger than my drawing board.
Wow.
I have quite a small drawing board. Mostly work on the comics.
That's
tends
amazing.
to be about A3 size.
Right.
But these paintings obviously are considerably larger than that, and they actually are larger than my drawing board. One of the biggest problems I have is I have a very small studio where I work, and I'm forever having to reposition the paintings when I'm doing them, so I've got access to that area of the picture, which sounds hilarious, but I'm moving the picture around a lot, and I use an easel as well, which I can easily move and shift around and alter the angle, etc. Sometimes I work on the painting standing up, sometimes sitting down. It just depends which bit I'm doing.
Wow. That's quite incredible. So, we have to sort of take these huge collages, and I call it a collage because really it's a collage of all chapters within that one thing. And, now every little illustration that happens in between that sort of elaborates a little bit more of what that happens in that chapter, that moment, to sort of give a little bit more of a visual movement throughout the story, rather than just like, hey, this is everything that happens here, and it's like, okay, now what are those little moments that matter in each of those chapters, which I think is a very, very good route, and sort of goes along. It's sort of like the middle between the fine line between a graphic novel and just a novel. And I think in collaboration with Jonathan Kruk, who is the narrator of the story, it's going to create this immersive feel where, as you're listening to his voice, you can see the images, and you can see, you can follow the text and be immersed. And on the audio side, which is my job, it's going to be in Dolby Atmos, where we will experience it in full 360 degrees, and have a super, super immersive experience into that book. So I'm actually in ways more excited about the book than I am about the album, for very, a very good reason. It's a good story that It's a good story that brings to life, lessons in humanity and how we should be thinking about, reflections and stuff like that. Because I feel like one of the biggest things with Homerik is that it's larger than, I always said it was larger than myself, and I never wanted it to be always, centered around the creator. It was about the story. It was about the content, and it certainly goes beyond, my imagination. It is a collaboration with many people, and I would say that over the years, whether it was an ex-bandmate or it's a future working partner, everybody has collaborated and pitched into Homerik, and that's because Homerik is bigger than just me. Even though, yes, I may be the root, it is not only me, and I am so glad that it's not, because I would never have been able to create the visuals like David Millgate. I would never have been able to execute reading the literature like Jonathan Kruk. These are, you guys are pivotal parts to all of this, that make Homerik. So it's really an honor for me, to be working with, creative minds like yourselves, and bring this vision to life in ways that I could only have ever dreamed of. So I want to just say thank you for that, because you are awesome, brother. you have such skill in what you do.
Thank you as well. I think we're all inspiring each other.
Yeah. It's all
so
mutual.
Yeah,
it's all mutual.
As I say, it's the project and the story is the story and the project and the idea is, I think, bigger than any one of us. And I think together working on it, and with Jonathan's amazing audio recordings, which have also inspired me while I've been doing these paintings, I think it's a really interesting project. I love the way you approached it, completely without ego, I have to say, which is so refreshing in this industry, and inspires me to really try and do the best work I ever can.
Well, thanks
for you and for the project.
Yeah, and I always thought about everything that I did was it was for Homerik, that it wasn't ever for me. That's always been a mentality, and probably in some ways to a fault. So, but to me, it's better than, being the center of attention, the rock star and all of it. Like, I love rock and I love metal, but I am like sort of the complete opposite of all of that in a sense too. And partially I think that's because I've grown up with so much art in my home, that, I went to school for visual art. In high school, that was what I studied. And in the middle of my studies then, I decided, while playing a game called Rock Band, I was interested in playing music. So my father, who was a musician, and my mother, who was an artist, they both influenced me on both sides. And I practiced art and I practiced music. So, I've always, been surrounded by people who, when they interpret or artistic creations and music and stuff like that, I was always taught it wasn't ever about the ego. It was always about what was creating the best content, and there's a good saying for that, and that content is king. And I do agree. It is more so about the kind of content, the quality of the content that you're giving, not just how many pieces of art, but how good are each one of those. And perhaps that is what makes Homerik more special than the rest, in my opinion. There is a more emphasis on quality over quantity, and that is certainly the case when it comes to The Circle of Dead Children, and even I think before that, the precursor. Even though that first album was I didn't know exactly what it would become. I knew the direction emotionally of where it was supposed to head, right? It was becoming this sort of film score metal mix, and I was like, I love what was happening there, but we need to. It was a sort of a diamond in the rough, right? And it needed to be polished. And with this album, I feel like we are definitely, doing that. And I feel even more strongly about that diamond being polished in the subsequent album, which we're already sort of in the preliminary workings of, which I'm very excited. So for those of you who are just catching up on this for the first time, we're writing Dante's Inferno in a sense. So Dante's Inferno starts with, well, the Inferno in hell, and then it becomes to purgatory, and then we get to heaven, and then there's also the beyond of what happens after heaven in this story, but we won't get there. This is the part where I am so excited, because when I started working on The Circle of Dead Children, there was still the remnants of what was in the first album bleeding into this one. And over time, I guess this is probably the reason why it took so long to make this particular album, is because this album needed to be refined over and over and over again. I must have had like 10 revisions of the same song, over the course of several years. And each one I thought was going to be the final one. So it's like things just changed over time, and it sort of is reflected in this collaboration that we have together, David. I must say, because I see that from the first painting to the very last painting that you've just submitted, I see the dynamics of how this story has truly unfolded, and it's so epic that I can't get enough of it. So I wanted to actually touch a little bit on your history and your background, and how did you when did you start painting, and what was it that got you started? Because I certainly understand from an artistic fellow like myself, what it means to grow up with art, but I wanted to know from your side, what was that like for you? Were you encouraged, or did you have to figure it out yourself, or what was that like?
Well, I was always encouraged by my parents with the art. It was something that, like I say, I have two brothers, and one's older than me, one's younger, but they're both very creative as well. So all three of us were sort of like given a bit of a gift, I guess, and encouraged to sort of try and improve that gift. And certainly I had teachers at school who were very encouraging. It was just always kind of accepted that we had this artistic talent, the three of us, and that we should really try and pursue that and do something with it, something positive. When I was about 10 or 11, that kind of age, I got into the punk rock music in the early sort of 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And I did a punk rock fanzine magazine with a friend of mine who lived across the street. We would go and see punk bands. We would go to the gigs. We probably weren't even old enough to go in some of these venues, actually thinking about it now, but we snuck in there. And we would interview the bands, we would review the gigs, we would then write up the fanzine. My friend did most of the writing and the editing side, and I did all the artwork. So I would draw all the band logos for the articles that we did. We would interview them, we'd do our own artwork for it. And then we'd photocopy these magazines and send them mail order all around the country. And we tapped into a network of other people doing the same thing. Now you have to remember, this is in a time before you were born, Ken.
That's right.
When the internet didn't exist.
Right.
There was none. That was just not there. So this was kind of like a tiny, ancient version of like the internet. The sort of everything would be sent via snail mail. people would send us vinyl records through the post to review and write about.
You mean people actually wrote letters
from all these bands?
People actually wrote letters?
Yeah. Absolutely. That was the only way you could do it. You could maybe phone. I remember phoning the band Discharge to interview them over the phone. And we interviewed some of the bands that were kind of big on that scene at the time, bands like Crass and Conflict.
Right.
We were just kids, you know. We were kind of a little bit out of our depth, maybe, really. But when you're that young, you're so innocent and you just believe anything's possible. So we just dove straight in there and got on with it. And I really enjoyed that. And I think it's kind of funny to look back on those things now, all these years later. I'm 52 years of age now, so it's a long time ago. But I think doing all those things was really integral to me going on this path that I then took. As well as being into all the music side of it, I was reading comic books. You know, I loved reading science fiction, you know, novels and things like that. And all of those things have played a part, I think, in bringing me to this point. So I was primed, so that when Homerik came along, I was ready for it, you know, and understood it straight away. Because I've been doing this kind of thing all my life, really. It's just what I do. It's obviously it's my kind of career, but it's also, I think, a vocation when you get interested in and take it to this kind of level, such as you're doing yourself with the music and the way you're approaching this. And all those little steps you took when you were younger that led you to this point are all really important. When you look at the whole story, you know, so I think that's true for most people who do this kind of work. You have to have a passion for it. It's either there or it's not.
Right.
And if you do really throw yourself into it and really try and learn and try and improve, I try and improve with every job that I do, every picture. The great thing about art and creativity is you can always get better at it. It doesn't matter how old you are, you know.
Right. And who are some of your artistic influences? Do you have any of them you'd like to share?
Well, certainly, if we're being a bit more specific about the Circle of Dead Children project and what we're doing for Homerik, I was looking at more classic paintings, you know, from years ago, hundreds of years ago, or, you know, people like Hieronymus Bosch and these depictions of hell, and the works of people like Francis Bacon and the Swiss artist H.R. Giger, and then I suppose more sort of modern comic book people like Bernie Wrightson and the amazing work that he did on things like Frankenstein, and the amazing horror comics that he produced in his career were a big influence on this. Also, you know, the people that I grew up reading in 2000 AD comic are artists like Brian Bolland, Kevin O'Neill. He was a big influence on me and still is. And I don't think he gets as much credit as he deserves. And then people in the 80s that came along, the painters like Simon Bisley, who took the painted comic art to another level. He was a huge influence on a lot of people, me included. But also people like Derek Riggs, who illustrated all the Iron Maiden record covers, all those Eddie artworks that you see in all those Maiden t-shirts.
Totally.
All those amazing covers he did for that band through the 80s. Stunning. I mean, they were actually really kind of important works of art to me when I was a kid.
Absolutely.
They were like, you know, I looked at those like you would look at Leonardo da Vinci or something, you know. To me, that's they were just the work of a total genius. The amount of detail he would cram into those paintings, and just the epicness that he managed to capture, and obviously the music being dramatic, heavy metal like it is, you know, obviously inspired him to do such amazing artwork. And yeah, Derek Riggs is another artist who I would definitely hold in high regard, and see him as a real strong influence on what I'm doing. And then there's other people like Frank Frazetta, and most people will have heard and be familiar with his amazing work. And then people from the movie industry who were concept designers like Ron Cobb and Sid Mead, Sadly, both now passed away. But yeah, there's just a few. I could go on all day with my, artistic heroes. There's so many of them.
Oh, for sure. And I can see, especially when you mentioned about Eddie, and you also mentioned about, some of these classic, Renaissance painters, in a sense. It's kind of hilarious that those painters, Hieronymus Bosch and also like Sandro Botticelli, these are Renaissance painters who were very much influenced by the original Dante. Alighieri from the medieval ages, sure. Right? So it's kind of like they look to Dante Alighieri as their Iron Maiden during that time. So, they kind of use that, and you're doing sort of a similar thing inspired by your own Iron Maiden and on a project like this. And it's so kind of cool to see how, even though, times have changed, I guess humans have not. we're very much still inspired by the same things. Yeah.
Exactly. Whoever you are, you have the people that came before you, that you looked up to, and that was true of, Renaissance painters hundreds of years ago, just as it's true today. No one comes out of a vacuum. Everyone is inspired by somebody or some work of art they've seen somewhere else, and that's turned them on to creative work in the first place. And it's great. The key is to, as you get older and you've been doing it longer and longer, is to find the inspiration where you can, and try to always be looking for it. And I'm always looking at new work by other people and amazed by some of the incredible work I see out there these days in the world of comic books and just art generally. There's such amazing people out there now, so there's always room to find new people to inspire you.
Oh, absolutely. I'm always now, actually, as a matter of fact, I've changed a lot of my musical listening palette to other genres over the past, I would say, even year or two. I've actually slowly become more interested in classical works than a lot of like the modern metal stuff. I think, even though I'm very much into metal, like I love metal, I always loved it ever since my brother showed me the first Disturbed CD he ever had. So I over time, I kind of tapped into something that my mother was always instilling very slightly over the years, which was every time she cleaned, she would always play like Baroque music. And that was something that I was always around, but I never really dived into it too much until I started actually teaching. And that was a big thing for me to kind of reflect onto who these people were and really find out like what their influences were. And me having to sort of present that information in a music history lesson truly made me appreciate what they were trying to do. And now, most of the time I'm listening to like Bela Bartok or Antonin Dvorak and these classical, not classical because they're more modernist composers or romantic composers, but their influence came from, everyone from Beethoven to the Romantics to the Impressionists to neoclassicism and all that stuff. So you sort of see how that lineage of influence just kind of moves forward, and just diving into that creates this feeling of like curiosity that I guess I never really harnessed before. And so that being said, looking forward to the future of Homerik, right? I'm sure, everybody is waiting to see what Circle of Dead Children is going to provide. But I want to just ask you, what do you envision the future of Homerik, maybe Homerik artwork to be? How do you think that might unfold within the context of what we've discussed? Actually, this is top secret information. So I want to know, what do you think is the future of Homerik and Homerik's art?
Well, I think the world's your oyster with this, and I can see it branching off into so many different areas, and possibilities are endless, really. It's become kind of like a multimedia project already, just with how it's been so far. Just from when I got on board in 2018, I think it was. Mm-hmm. Yeah, 2018. And just the way I've seen it progress while we've been doing the first Inferno part and the 9 big paintings that I've done in that few years that I've been working on it, it's already kind of grown bigger than I thought it was going to be. And it's kind of evolving as we go along already, just naturally. And I think it's just becoming bigger than any one of its individual parts. You know, the sum is greater than any one of those parts.
Right.
When you combine it all together, I think the possibilities are endless. Why not have a computer game based on it, or a movie or a TV series? So many ways people can enjoy content like this these days with technology and with streaming and all the other options that are out there now. There's so many ways you can present the work to people. I think you should just keep an open mind, and we should, as a group, collectively keep an open mind about where it could go and see, you know, where it naturally evolves itself. I think it's kind of growing almost like exponentially already. Just the way that you've encompassed, you know, what Jonathan's doing with the audio book, what I'm doing with my work, the paintings and the art, and what you're doing with the music side. I think there's any number of ways that it could go. And why limit it? You know, let's see where we can take it and see who else we can get on board who might have fantastic ideas to bring to the table and make it evolve even more, you know?
I totally 100% agree. I think, yeah, a multimedia project is certainly what this is becoming, or what it has already become at this point. And I cannot wait to see what the future holds for Homerik.
So on a personal level, for me to be involved in something like this, which is a long-term project, you know, it's not like a short-term thing where I start a painting on Friday and by Monday morning it's finished. This is a long game we're playing, and it's nice to be involved in something that's got potential, and it's given itself the time to breathe and grow and you know, evolve naturally, like it is. It's fantastic.
Well, thank you for saying that, David. I feel really, really warm about that. My heart is warm and full of love for that. So I can't wait. And on that note, I think that we'll call it there for our interview. And thank you for spending the time to speak about this. I think it's good for our audience to hear your side to all of this, and not just from me. And I want to just thank everybody and yourself, David, for joining us for today. So have a great time. Have a great Christmas. And
you too, Ken, and everybody out there. Have a great one.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, just stay safe out there. You know, COVID-19 is still out there, and we want to make sure that everybody is always staying healthy and safe. So, well, without further ado, thank you, David, so much. Have a great day.